This episode of Engineering the Future is brought to you by Member Perks for OSPI, helping engineers and their families save money on everything from electronics and food to apparel and home improvements. New perks are being added all the time. Visit Member Perks for OSPI before you shop and enjoy exclusive savings from brand names and local favorites online, curbside, and in-store.
This podcast is brought to you by OSPI, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, the advocacy body for professional engineers in the engineering community in Ontario.
Welcome to Engineering the Future, a podcast presented by the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers. I am your host, Jerome James. Today I'm joined by Kadra Branker, professional engineer an OSPI member who works at the Independent Electricity System Operator. Thank you for joining us today, Kadra. What is the IESO and what do you do there?
Thank you for having me here today, Jerome. So the IESO is a nonprofit organization that manages the reliability of the province's electricity system. Its mandate is to ensure the electricity is available when and when it's needed. If you think of an orchestra, the IESO is like the conductor, ensuring the various players in the market are working well together today in real time, as well as planning into the future. So if you think like the next 5 minutes to the next 20 years. So in true fashion, the supply needs to meet the demand.
Okay, interesting. And what is your role at this operator?
So that's perfect. So if you think about planning, energy efficiency is a big part of that. Energy efficiency continues to be the lowest cost resource in the market. And that's where my role comes in. I'm a program advisor that oversees the delivery of the largest energy efficiency program in the province, and it's called the retrofit program. So in program delivery, right, I have concepts and targets that are set out for the program, and I work with my colleagues and various vendors to make those a reality in the marketplace.
Interesting. What's the history of energy efficiency programs, incentives, that whole thing? How long has that been a thing in Ontario?
Oh, for sure. So electrical energy efficiency has been delivered under the Save on Energy brand for a really long time. And in fact, like perfect timing, it's our 10-year anniversary this year.
Oh, wow. It's a long time.
Yeah. And it's like, so over the past decade, we've been able to save over 16 terawatt hours of energy, or enough energy to power 1.8 million homes for a year.
And was there a need for this savings? Where did this concept come from? Is Ontario the only ones doing it, or is there programs like this across Canada?
Oh, absolutely. So energy efficiency is actually a best practice when you think about that, right? So if you think of a market and you have supply and demand, not only do you just want to keep building things out, but you also want to make sure that we're using everything efficiently. So right. Ontario does this. A lot of other jurisdictions in North America do this, and places as well in Europe. And This year, actually, we're going to continue doing it. So we're excited to continue our commitment with a new 4-year framework this year. And, despite the challenges of the pandemic, we're still on track to get really close to some of our targets. Hopefully cross fingers, we keep moving ourselves out of this pandemic. But, it's definitely an important part of that planning piece. And actually, and in OSPI, I think one of the things you might have heard is that in the short term, we might have enough energy, right? But even though in the short term, we have enough energy, we always have to be thinking about the future. So changes in demand for electricity, changes of the supply mix in the future, that's something we have to plan for right now. An example is, think about electric vehicles, right? And the increasing demand for charging infrastructure. That's going to continue to increase our demand. So we need to kind of work that in there. And the energy efficiency space right now is where, we're looking at other jurisdictions. It's becoming a best practice. And we're taking our time right now to reshape and evolve our programs so that we can continue to transform the market.
That's very interesting. What were kind of the pillars of this program before And how are you guys adopting for the future? Have the priorities changed? Has the market changed? What has prompted these framework changes in the last little while?
Absolutely. So one of the first parts of, understanding the need for the framework, of course, part of that is the support of government and whatnot, is, what do we need at a given time? So there are times when demand and supply and those forecasts are, wide, and we have to do a lot of conservation. And then there are times when it's, a little bit closer and we don't need as much. So right now in the short term, we might not need as much, but in the long term, we see that expanding. So we want to make sure that we're spending the money and we're being cost effective when we need to. So in the past, where programs might have just been like, all we were trying to do is try to, start that culture of energy efficiency, people are getting it now. The prices of things are going down. We're starting to see that market transformation. So we need to continue to drive changes to make it more competitive, to continue to be cost effective, because at the end of the day, it needs to benefit all Ontarians, right? And right now, I'd say one of the important parts is us targeting system needs. Across the grid, it's not the same thing everywhere. There's some places where there's a lot of boom and, the supply can't match it, and other places there's excess. So we have to do that planning, not just on a holistic level, but also on a regional level.
Can we revisit that 16 terawatt figure? And what does that actually entail? Are we changing behavior? How much private investment is coming into creating that 16 terawatts? Without this incentive program, where would we be in Ontario?
Honestly, I can't. I do not have a full crystal ball, and I haven't been here for that whole time. But if I were to think about, where would we be without those incentives, it would mean not creating some of those jobs and some of those suppliers and manufacturers that are focused on creating energy efficient technologies. I mean, think about LEDs and CFLs. Like there was a whole, you moved from incandescent bulbs, we moved to CFLs, we moved to LEDs. And, something has to help you drive that. That's the only time when a market agent like ourselves would intervene, is to try to drive that. Similarly with behavior. I mean, even if you think of energy efficiency and think of the 3 Rs, it takes time to put in those education programs for people to become aware, to even say, what, this is important to me in my organization right now. And actually, I'd like to take the moment maybe to even think about how diverse this program is. So the retrofit program is a business program, but it's a very diverse one. I mean, we have participants that are hospitals, we have social housing, you have industrial facilities, you have your grocery stores, etc. Right? You have lots of different people in the market. And Jerome, I mean, yourself, like at work right now, is energy efficiency important to your company?
I feel that there's this new wave of realization that efficiency is a bottom line driver, and it's not just greenwashing. It's not just, oh, we need to do something to check a box. It's literally corporate. I can speak a little bit to the industry that I'm in. Everyone wants to know well-to-wheel carbon footprints of their machinery and their products, so that they can brag to their donors or their board that they're actually making a change and making a difference. Every piece of a car that you can understand the amount of carbon that goes into it is a selling point onto itself, and it drives numbers. Whether or not you can hire more and improve your output, definitely. I feel that kind of philosophy, it's not a left or right thing anymore. It's a bottom line driver type of thing right now.
And that's really awesome to hear. And I think that's the point, right? It's not just this extra other thing. It's absolutely integrated as part of our lives, part of our businesses. And it's more than just reducing the energy. There are all these other added benefits that you can get sometimes, whether it be better lighting so that it's a safer environment, or better indoor air quality with a better HVAC system, or more comfort. because you have the right temperature set points, there are a lot of other benefits beyond it just being energy efficiency.
Absolutely. And so how are some of the things, I'm more familiar about the incentive to upgrade machinery or be more energy efficient around in an industrial setting. What are some of the things that we can do from a personal perspective to be more energy efficient in our everyday life?
So I think there's a lot of different things, but I would say the first place to start is, well, knowledge is power, right? So understanding your energy bills, don't just pay them. Take a look at them. Understand how much you actually use right now. And then if you know where you're at right now, then you're going to actually be able to see the benefits of the actions that I'm about to talk about kind of over time. So the first thing I like to think about is maybe just taking that time to think, what are some alternative ways of doing things to help me save energy? For example, I try to air dry my clothes, hang them up. I have a little rack and do that instead of using the laundry dryer. And honestly, sometimes that's even better for your clothes. They last longer. And then the next thing is that we have a lot of tools and technology now. There's so many. So, how can you use those to help you on your journey to using less energy? So, for example, a lot of us have programmable thermostats right now. So if you were to use that, there are certain schedules that you could set, and you can make sure that you're heating and cooling only when you need to at the amount that you need to.
Right. Absolutely. Those new smart meters are amazing. Occupancy sensors, it learns your habits and when you're inside and when you're not, and it adjusts accordingly. It's a real lifesaver when you don't want to think and just save. Get a smart meter.
Yeah, and even more, it's like some of them, they're connected to your phone now. And so you're like, you've left, you've gone on vacation. You're like, oh, wait, do I really need to be heating it up all the way while there's nobody there? You can turn it down. And on your way back from vacation or from your trip, you can just turn it back up so it's warming up. You can still achieve energy efficiency and still have comfort.
We hope you're enjoying this episode so far. At OSPI, we're here for you, making sure government, media, and the public are listening to the voice of engineers. You can learn more at ospi.on.ca.
In your role at the IESO, what are some of the things that you bring to the table as an engineer?
Thanks, Jerome. That's a good question. It may not be typical to find an engineer in a department called Policy, Engagement, and Innovation, right? So what I bring as an engineer really is critical thinking, fact-based decision-making, and a culture of duty of care to society. I like to ask questions about why we do things a certain way, just to discern if they really are the best way. I think this goes back to my roots and just trying to solve complex problems and trying to, gain the best outcome that you can for the situation. I definitely love learning and I enjoy challenges, especially working with both technical and non-technical professionals, because it brings so many perspectives to the table. And really that diversity of perspectives is what leads to better outcomes. And that's what I like to, pull all of those inputs together to, create an impact that's important for society.
Interesting. Do you work with other engineers in your department, or is it do you liaise with engineers outside as a cohesion within the organization?
So I do have to work with engineers both inside the organization and outside of the organization. So as I mentioned before, I work with certain colleagues and I also work with various vendors. So we have vendors in the market who help with and who have to be experts in the technologies when they're reviewing the applications or helping applicants apply. So I work with them from that perspective. And then internally, we have to have people who design some of these measures, review them, continue to evolve our programs. So I need to be able to take the technical requirements and translate them into that program, translate them to our vendors, but then also translate it to the market.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And I don't think I was gave full transparency earlier, but as an energy manager in my day-to-day role, I interact with the retrofit program on a daily basis. So this is hitting home very closely, this whole conversation that we're having today. Very interesting, your insights on these topics. I want to talk a little bit of, the elephant in the room, COVID-19, the pandemic. How has this time affected program delivery, the market, the efficiency program in general?
That's a really good question. And I would say my program has been impacted differently than other programs, and it depends on the delivery model. For some of the programs where it heavily depended on sort of like in-home audits, for example, those ones definitely had to be pulled back and go to a waiting list because we wanted to wait till it was safe enough to do so, and we didn't want to impose that upon people at home trying to deal with the multitude of other issues with this pandemic. But from the business side of things, I think what was really interesting from the seat of being in a province-wide program is seeing almost the boom and bust of different businesses across the table. So honestly, as a program, we did much better than we would have expected we would have done as far as still being on track to meet the targets that we need. And that's because there were certain industries that continued to boom despite the pandemic. For example, yeah, and it's like you'd be absolutely surprised. I mean, people took advantage of opportunities when schools were closed. All of a sudden you had schools saying, you know what, I don't have to wait, for an outage or a time period for when if there's nobody in the school, let's get in there and do those projects that we wanted to get done, right?
Because that's a big issue with scheduling. When do I do an upgrade when you have classes and people week to week? Scheduling could be hard for these retrofits.
Exactly. So people, I would say I saw like the resiliency in the market in a way where people took advantage of opportunities when they could, and then they were also upfront with us when they couldn't. And that means that we actually took some opportunities then to tweak some things in the program to help people still be able to engage with us. So for example, we require photos of the existing equipment in the initial application. But because you have in-person restrictions, right at the get-go, we decided, well, maybe there's other information that we could use for the purpose of reviewing the initial application. And then we can delay those photos to when the actual installation is taking place. You could take a photo of the existing thing, take a photo of the new thing when it's installed, because you're only going to have an installation take place when it's safe enough to do so. Mm-hmm. So instead of having to make someone try to get someone in there more than once, then they could just do it once. And so those are the kinds of things where, we try to learn with other jurisdictions. We try to work with our own vendors, to make sure they're following health and safety protocols. And then we try to relax things where we could without affecting program integrity.
Right. I also want to ask you about where we stand in the world of energy efficiency compared to our competitors. I don't know, California, the Europe. How do we stack up in this conservation game? Are we a world leader, or are there jurisdictions that we can learn from? How do we stack up in this game?
So I'd have to say that sort of the energy efficiency game is very local and very personal. And I wouldn't say you could really do an apples to apples comparison to say, okay, well, this place is better than that place. But what it is, if we look at where we want to be, because it really is tied to the system, you look at where you want to be and are you on your way to doing that? And, we're doing a great job of being on track to do that. We also have a lot of other ambitious projects and things that we're wanting to try to do to change the programs to be either more cost effective or more competitive, to try different business models for different programs. So in some ways, we're a leader in trying out some of those new pilots for those different types of programs designs. Sometimes we do something different from what everyone else is doing. We're trying a prescriptive only version of the retrofit program right now. And then we're taking the time to redesign what the custom side of things might look like, perhaps not even in this program, but maybe in an open call offering where different participants can bid in, like into an auction, for example, or bid, various proposals. So we are continuing to toy and experiment with things in a controlled manner to kind of figure out, again, what's going to bring the best value and the best results for the grid.
Great. And do you see any hiccups along the way with the proliferation of electrification of travel, the uptake of EVs? If you had that crystal ball vision that you referenced earlier, what do you see that's in store for Ontario the next 10 to 15 years when it comes to energy and sustainability?
Honestly, it's the biggest thing I could say, probably with certainty for the crystal ball, is it's going to be exciting. It's definitely going to be exciting. There are a lot of different projects on the go across the board, from an electrical side, kind of the gas side, there's storage, there's a whole bunch of different things where a lot of different parties are coming together to tackle those challenges. So I'd say it's not like things are going to blow up in a long time, because that's the whole point of us engineers being around, and as well as our other counterparts, where we're sitting down and planning ahead. So we are running various types of models, trying to figure out all of the worst case, best case scenarios, and where can we get those things, and how do we come up with a plan to get those resources, in those timelines. So we do have sort of high and low demand scenarios for electrical vehicles, and we're figuring that out. We're working regionally, we're working with other distributors, and honestly taking that complex problem, breaking it down, and figuring out what we need to do. But for sure, it's going to be exciting and quite an evolution in the next 10 years.
Great. And you think that that's policy driven from a local level, from a federal level? How does policy affect the trajectory? I know that the city of Toronto have some aggressive targets to eliminate internal combustion cars in the inner city by 2050. Is that a correct statement there?
I can't remember the exact specifics, but definitely in the to go to net zero, there are a lot of aggressive pieces in the city of Toronto's plans, including even like the densification of the downtown and a whole other host of things where, from at least the electrical point of view, if you have a lot more people in the same space, that's a very dense need for electricity. So we still need to plan for that as well. If we have a lot of electrification, like you said, again, that's going to be another need. But going back to your question about sort of the policy and is it important? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. It definitely it definitely sends that signal to the market and to other players that we're serious, and we're serious for this time period, depending on how long. So similar to how we have now a new 4-year framework, it's like we're serious. We're doing this for the next 4 years. When there's government policies or funding available. So there are federal signals and provincial signals that we're getting around storage, for example, climate change objectives, and that's where you're getting into those net zero challenges and timelines, being part of the Paris Accord. So we definitely those parts of policy help give people the certainty to invest in those types of technologies. Great.
I would be remiss if I didn't wish you a belated happy International Women's Day. How did you celebrate yesterday?
A lot of colleagues at work cheered each other on, I would say, for International Women's Day. I would have liked to have attended. I know Step Up had a cool coffee side chat where they, integrated a whole bunch of people, and they're trying to kind of elevate women in the workplace. And then there's also kind of some fun shirts that people wore, science and technology is where women are supposed to be, and things like that. So I, quietly enjoyed it, but still, passed on kudos to my colleagues. Not the same when you don't get to see people in person as much.
Amazing. That must have been a lot of fun. I would like to switch gears a little bit and learn more about you and your journey within STEM and engineering. How did you get involved in engineering to begin with? And then how did you choose a career path within energy and then subsequently energy efficiency?
For sure, Jerome. Good question. So my journey, I would say, started off when I was a teenager back home in Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm actually originally from Trinidad and Tobago. I'm now Canadian. And for myself, climate change at the time was really top of mind. It's part of the education. It's part of what you're hearing in the news, and it's part of something that I saw every day. I was actually close to the water. You could see things happening to coral reefs in my lifetime, right? You could see garbage, you could see algae and that kind of thing, and just wanting to learn more about it and wanting to do something. And so I kind of asked and I researched and I said, okay, well, man, this climate change thing, it's a really complex problem. It's interwoven. There's so many aspects to it. Who are people out there that solve complex problems? And that's how I stumbled across like the concept of an engineer. And I said, oh, that's really cool. That's what I want to be. And then that's how I started my journey to say, okay, let me find a way. Let me find, a way to get into education where I could learn engineering. And then that kind of tied into the energy space. Like no matter what we're doing, right now, we're going to need energy. There's certain things in life and in society that we just need. So we need to have a plan for sustainability along those lines for energy, how we use it, how we produce it. We need to have a plan. And so I always thought, okay, between, those fundamental skills that you need as an engineer, that I'd want to be in this type of industry and be able to help, in the larger picture of things.
Great. Oh, wow. That's quite the journey. Seeing change so close to home and then trying to do something about it. And that bringing you to Canada. That's a great story. One last thing. I know that you're an OSPI member. Tell us why you're an OSPI member and some of the benefits of being a part of the community.
Okay, so we'll talk about the benefits in addition to the really good car insurance. A lot of people do talk about that. It's one of the first things you hear from people is like, oh, the good car insurance. But in all honesty, I am an OSPI member because, education and being part of a community is really important to me. So the events, webinars, workshops over all of the years that I've been here, I was even, an OSPI member before I was a professional engineer as a student. Those things have always helped me to grow as an engineer, to grow as a professional, and to grow as a member of society.
Thank you so much. I feel like we've learned so much today. And do you have any last closing thoughts that you'd like to share with us before we wrap up?
Absolutely. I do have a couple kudos and things that I do want to impart. One of the things, like thinking about engineers, especially with this being National Engineering Month, is that engineers, they're a part of maintaining systems and products and things that are so beneficial to society, and they often go unnoticed. And I want to say that, perhaps that's one of the things that we need to continue to do is elevate for people that the things that we take for granted actually do revolve around a lot of important people. I want to thank my colleagues, for example, in the control room at the IESO, those people who are out there ensuring that electricity, you have electricity when you need it and is continuing to operate all the way through the pandemic. It's not a crisis. And, it's not a part of the things that anyone has to think about. You go to your light switch and it turns on and it's there. But of course, if you went there one day and it didn't, you'd be pretty upset. So, engineers make sure there isn't a crisis, right? We plan. And maybe it's not as sexy, or as intense as some of the other TV dramas, but it's important.
Absolutely, 100%. Thank you so much. This has been a conversation with Kadra Branker, professional engineer and OSPI member responsible for program delivery at the Independent Electricity Systems Operator in Ontario.
From all of us at OSPI, the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, thanks for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.